Hi, this is my final presentation regarding the Second Amendment and some of the Supreme Court cases that help define and shape how we view the Second Amendment today. By me, go large, who could have guessed? The first case I will be looking at is the District of Columbia v. Heller case. The reason why I chose this case is not only due to the reason that this is the oldest case I will be looking at, but due to the fact that this case will kind of set the groundwork for the other two cases. What I mean by that is the other two Supreme Court cases that I'm going to be looking at either build off of the Heller decision or they use it in their rulings. Okay, so the next one I'm going to be looking at is the McDonald versus the City of Chicago. In this case, the City of Chicago passed some laws, so you had to register your firearm in order to own one, which in itself isn't that big of a problem, while at the same time preventing people from registering new firearms, like new versions of firearms. Like say a Glock 11 just came out, or it's coming out next year. This law would make it so you can't get that gun. You can't have that as a registered firearm. Okay, this ultimately led the City of Chicago being taken to trial. Kind of lost that case because, well, who could have guessed this is unconstitutional, as we're going to get into later. The next case we're going to be looking at is the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Brennan. This case focused around the New York's procedure for owning a firearm. Due to the fact that for New York State, in order to have a concealed carry, you need a permit. And the only way you could get a permit was talking to the police chief. And the police chief they didn't really give them out to everyday citizens. You needed a valid reason. What I mean, not by a valid reason, you needed a very good reason in order to have a concealed carry, which in most cases means you had to have a threat of death in order to get a gun, which is unconstitutional. You don't need to fear for your life in order to have the right to protect yourself, because if you don't, sometimes that's too late. Okay, and we're going to be taking a look at my literature review. First on the agenda is a law review by Dana P. Denning and Reynolds H. Glenn. This law review goes into depths on arguments and decisions that led to the outcomes in the Columbia v. Heller case. The reason why I have this is because it helped me get a baseline understanding for what the court cases were about. Because it's really hard to get an understanding about law cases because I don't know. It's almost like I don't have a law major yet. Crazy, I know. So it just helped me get a baseline info for each of the law cases, helped me get a general understanding, and led me to many of the decisions that I'm going to be presenting with. Okay, next thing we're going to be doing is case file for the specific Supreme Court trial, Columbia v. Heller. The reason why I have this is because the court files, what they do is they summarize each side's points, and then they summarize the outcome of the trial, so it's very nice to have. And then on top of that, they give a word-for-word just description of what was being said in the courtroom during the trial, which is very nice to have. Who could have guessed having a literal document of what was being said in the courtroom would be useful for a presentation talking about those topics. Next on, we've got the literature review. What am I saying? The case file for the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Barone. Don't really know how to pronounce his name. Same reason as before. It's just good to have a copy that goes into depth about what each side said, a little summary about each thing, and the decision. Because who would have guessed? I'm still talking about the Supreme Court case, so having the file is nice. Then again, I've got another case file with McDonald and the City of Chicago. Same thing. It's just nice to have a little file that tells me what happened in the court case. Then next up I have is an article written by Michael Nieto Michael that not only talks about the circumstances leading up to the case, but the fallout that the court case had on the City of Chicago. I picked this one up because having background on the circumstances that led to this court case is helpful in understanding both sides of the argument. So just having a little background information is nice, so I thought I'd use this as a little source. Then I have a law review by Henry H. Robinson. This source talks about the relevance between Maroon and Heller decisions in layman's terms, so that even I can understand it. Because it's kind of really hard to understand the similarities if I don't, like I said, have a law degree. So this guy dumbs it down for me. He dumbs it down for me, not dumbs it down. That was rough. And for my final source, who would have guessed it? I have the Second Amendment. Because, well, when you are doing a presentation regarding the Second Amendment, it kind of helps to have the Second Amendment on hand so you can refer to it and see what the heck they're talking about. Okay, first case I'm going to be looking at is the District of Columbia v. Heller. In this case, the District of Columbia made it a crime to carry unregistered firearms and prohibiting the registering of new firearms. So the only way that you could get a firearm registered was to talk to the police chief who could authorize a 1-year licenses. However, that wasn't really, he didn't have any set guides, so it was kind of just willy-nilly. He gave some to some people. Well, it's not one person, it's like everyone. It's like, oh yeah, you can have it, you can't have it. There was no really grounds for what they couldn't have. Additionally, this unregistered firearms, they need to be unloaded and disassembled or bound by a trigger lock when not being used actively in the home. Like, if you can't just have it lying around. So this led to Heller was a policeman. He wanted to get a registered firearm for personal use, just to carry around when he was off duty. And he got denied, so he filed a suit. Got taken to court. It was a fiasco. The whole argument being made by the District of Columbia was that the Second Amendment says that you need to be in a militia in order to have these free and uncontested gun rights. However, Heller argued that the Second Amendment applied to all Americans and that you didn't need to be part of a militia to have a firearm in your home. The reason why they're saying is because if you look at the Second Amendment, it states a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So they're basically saying, well, you kind of have to be in a militia in order for these to apply to you, but then they're like, no, that's not really how it works, because you could have guns if you weren't in the militia historically, whatever. Basically saying, you can't do that. So that was fun. So that led to them deciding, well, ultimately that was unconstitutional, and they can't just enforce these unconstitutional laws. Additionally, when they were talking about the lock requirement, the dismantling of just having it around your house, you can't just have it fully operational, they decided that too was unconstitutional due to the fact that it was so difficult for you to defend yourself with, who could have imagined, a disassembled firearm, that it defeated the purpose of you actually being able to bear arms in this case. So they ruled that, well, that's unconstitutional. We can't enforce that you keep a trigger lock on your gun at all times, because what's the point of defending yourself if someone breaks into your house if your gun is locked? Can't do anything. And you lost the key. That would be fun.